Welcome to the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast, your weekly dose of accounting and tax tips specific to small business owners. You will be on your way to growing your business and paying the least amount in taxes as legally possible. Here's your host, Mike Jesowshek, CPA.
Hello and welcome back to another episode. Today's topic is what do I need to know about 1099s? Now, more than likely, if you're a business owner, you've heard of a 1099. You've either received one for services that you may have provided, or you've been told that you need to send them out, or you have sent them out. And really what I want to do is take the time today to clear any confusion and ensure that you have everything you need to know about 1099s, because it's not going to be long before you need to start preparing them and sending them out. This is January, so it's not very long before you're going to have to be preparing 1099s, sending them out. You're going to be receiving them. So I want to take the time now so that you're prepared and can do some legwork potentially in front of that January deadline. So let's start with the first basic question. What is one thing you need to make sure you know about 1099s? And if your business pays a subcontractor, a vendor, something like that, whether it's an individual or another business, if you pay them over $600 in a year, you need to send them a 1099 NEC. Now, if you walk away from anything from this, just know that if you pay a contractor, you will want to request a W-9 from them so that you can send them a 1099 at year end. Remember, if you remember anything from this, if you're paying somebody for something within your business, ask them for a W-9. This is going to make that 1099 process so much easier at year end. Now, if you are a contractor that has received a 1099 NEC, you must report this income, of course, on your tax return. The IRS is going to get a copy of this same exact form, and they're going to make sure that matches, or that you're at least reporting that income that has been reported to the IRS. So you should always report your income. Whether you receive a 1099 NEC or not, you should always be reporting the income you received. Okay, now let's dig a little deeper. I just wanted to get the kind of important piece up front. If you pay a contractor over $600 for the year, you likely will have to file a 1099 NEC. If you're paying a contractor anything, ask them for a W-9 so that you have the information to prepare that 1099 at the end of the year. And if you received a 1099, you're going to want to make sure that that's reported on your income tax return, your personal tax return, and really any income you receive should be reported, whether or not a 1099 is actually received from you. All right, so let's get it, again, a little bit more granular with this topic. When do you need to file a 1099? Like, who is required to file a 1099 NEC? Again, if you paid a contractor $600 or more in total for a year, you would need to send them a 1099 NEC. This could include an individual, a subcontractor, a company, a vendor, etc. It's just for if you paid someone for services performed, parts and materials, things like that, over $600 in total for the year, you would need to send them a 1099 NEC. Now, one thing to note, and this comes up a lot when we talk to people, this is accumulative. So if you send 3 payments of $250 for a total of $750 throughout the year, a 1099 NEC would be required. And this is where we see a lot of people get mixed up, because they pay someone $200 and say, well, I don't need to send them a 1099, but they pay them $200 today, $200 the next month, $200 3 months from now, and then another $200 later. Now they're over that $600 limit. So they do need to send a 1099. That's what we always say, no matter what, always just grab a W-9, because you never know when you're going to go over that $600 amount. So again, it's a cumulative total, $600 or more per year. Now, there are some exceptions to this. The exceptions on when a 1099 NEC is not required to be filed is if you make payments to a C or an S corporation. That's a C corporation or an S corporation. Now, if you're making payments to attorneys for legal services, this exception does not qualify. But any other entity, if they're a C or S corporation, 1099 NEC does not need to be filed for them. Again, if you're collecting that W-9, right on that W-9, it's going to tell you whether they're a C or S corporation. Then you just know, keep that W-9 on file, but you do not need to file a 1099 for them. You don't need to file a 1099 for employees, because instead of filing a 1099 for employees, you're actually going to be submitting a W-2 at year end for them. So no 1099 for employees, because you're going to replace a 1099 with a W-2. You do not need to file a 1099 for payments for merchandise, telephone, freight, or storage costs. You do not need to file a 1099 for payments to non-U.S. citizens that are performing work outside of the U.S., and you do not need to submit a 1099 NEC for payments made via credit card or PayPal or things like that. Instead, for those items, the merchant processor is actually going to report those earnings to that vendor via a 1099K. So therefore, you don't have to report it because the merchant processor is going to report it. Now, if you pay someone on PayPal via friends and family, that's a different story. That would require a 1099 because the PayPal does not look at that as a business transaction. But in general, if you're paying via credit card or PayPal or those types, 1099 would not be required because the merchant processor is going to actually send that 1099, which will be a 1099K for them. So this means that if during the normal course of business you pay someone via check, wire, cash, Venmo, Zelle, and things like that, you more than likely will be required to send them a 1099 NEC unless you meet one of those exceptions that we talked about. The person or company that is paying the contractor is the one that files the 1099 NEC. And this is sometimes things that people get mixed up. They're like, I don't need to file a 1099. If you're the one paying the contractor, you are the one that files the 1099 NEC. Now, one caveat to that, if you paid a contractor for personal services, then a 1099 is not required. So let's go through an example. If you put on a new deck to your home, it has nothing to do with your business, no need to send a 1099. It would just be for business items, payments that you're making within your business. So let's go through, what is the typical 1099 NEC process that we recommend clients take? Step number 1, and we've talked about this already, collect a W-9 from all contractors you pay, even if it's under $600. As with future payments, you might get above $600, and you're going to want to make sure you have that W-9 then. This is a lot of times where sometimes it's hard to get a 1099 or a W-9 from someone after the fact. So just ask for it up front. This is important. Again, one rule of thumb, before you pay anyone, collect a W-9 from them. That's step 1. Step 2, if a 1099 NEC is required, again, it doesn't meet any of the exceptions above, then you as the business will prepare that 1099. All information you need to prepare a 1099 would be found directly on that W-9 that you received from the contractor. Step 3 is send a copy of the Form 1099 NEC form to the contractor. And then step 4 is file a copy of the 1099 NEC with the IRS and state if it's required in your certain area. Now, for us internally here at our firm and our podcast, everything else, we use a software called Track 1099 to handle the preparation and filing of those 1099s. So if you want to make it a little bit easier, they have just a fee that you have to do, that you pay to process that 1099. You can email it to the client. You can mail it into the IRS to handle all those items. So again, one thing to remember too is if you are a contractor that has received a 1099 NEC, this must be reported as income on your personal or business tax return. Now, one thing to note, if a payment was made to a non-U.S. citizen for work performed outside of the U.S., you would not need to send a 1099 NEC. We talked about that in the exceptions, but you should still be collecting a W-8 BEN or a W-8 BENE, and that's going to serve as proof that that contractor, that worker that you paid is foreign. So that W-8 BEN will be something they fill out that proves that they're a foreign entity or a foreign individual. So make sure you're collecting, instead of a W-9 from someone foreign, make sure you're collecting a W-8 BEN. And then within the show notes to our podcast episode here, we have links to the W-9, we have links to the W-8, so feel free to go in the show notes, download those items. So next kind of question is, when does the 1099 NEC need to be filed by? And 1099s must be filed with the IRS and sent to the recipient by January 31st of the following year. Now, if the 31st falls on the weekend, it would be the next business day. So if you pay, Joe Smith contractor throughout the year of 2022, you would have to send them a 1099 by January 31st of 2023. So you have about a month to start preparing, filing, and sending those 1099s to that contractor. The next question that comes up is, what if I just don't do it? What are the penalties for not filing a 1099 NEC? Or if maybe you're just hearing this and you didn't file one last year, you might be saying, okay, how much trouble I am. And really the penalty just depends on how late you are. If you file within 30 days past the deadline, the IRS will impose a $50 penalty. If you file more than 30 days but before August 1st, it's $110 per 1099. If you file after August 1st or not at all, it's a $280 penalty per 1099. Or if you intentionally disregard, you intentionally did not send a 1099, then it's going to be $570 per. So simple fact is just take care of it. Collect the information that you need. Take care of filing those 1099s and just get them filed. Now, most of what we talked about today is 1099 NECs. There are a bunch of 1099s, and you might be receiving other ones personally. So I just kind of want to go through what other types of 1099 forms are out there. In simply put, a 1099 form is simply just an informational filing form used by companies, by entities, by banks to report non-salary income to the IRS. And there's over 15 different types of 1099 forms that are used for various purposes. We talked about 1099 NEC here. That's the most common one that we see businesses sending out to contractors. You might have a 1099 miscellaneous, and these are used for other items like rental payments that you made, royalty payments, prizes and awards, other types of income that you may be paid out. There's the 1099 INT, interest basically, and financial institutions are required to pay these or file these forms if they pay you more than $10 in interest during the year. There's the 1099K. We kind of talked about this earlier. This is issued by third-party payment processors, so think of things like credit card, PayPal, things like that. If payments over the year total $600 or more, they would send these out to the actual vendors. So most of the time it's going to be businesses collecting these. Now, I said $600 or more. Previously, it was $20,000 before a 1099K would be required, but this was a change in the tax law. And then there's 1099 DIVs, and this form reports distributions, dividends, capital gain distributions, things like that. If you have a brokerage account, you might be familiar with this. A 1099B happens when you sell stock. It shows kind of the date of the sale, the cost basis, those types of items. A 1099G is used to report unemployment compensation or refunds that you're receiving from the state. Another popular one we see is 1099R. This is if you are taking distributions from a retirement plan, you're going to be receiving these. But when it comes down to it, the most common that we see business owners need to deal with is the 1099 miscellaneous. This is typically going to be if you have rent payments within your business, and the 1099 NEC. And again, that's going to be for contractors, vendors, things like that. So let's kind of summarize everything we want to know about 1099s, specifically 1099 NECs today. Always grab a W-9 or a W-8 if it's an international vendor from all contractors, vendors, etc. that you pay. You never know when you may need it, and it can be hard after the fact to get it. You don't know how many business owners we talked to in January when we're trying to file 1099s that never grabbed a W-9. And they're reaching out, they're asking, not getting a response, and now they're kind of stuck because they didn't grab it up front. So just keep that a rule of thumb. If you're paying somebody for work within your business, ask for a W-9. If you have total payments throughout the year totaling $600 or more, it's going to trigger that 1099 NEC requirement unless certain exceptions are met. And remember, there's kind of a couple main exceptions that we have. Payments to a C or S corporation, no 1099 NEC required unless it's a payment to a attorney for legal services. And you're going to be able to tell if it's a C or S corporation based on that W-9 that they send you. Payments to employees, not required. Again, you're submitting a W-2 for these instead. Payments for merchandise, telephone, freight, or storage, not required. Payments to a non-U.S. citizens performing work outside of the U.S., not required. But again, you're going to want to collect a W-8 BEN from them. And again, if you make payments via credit card or PayPal or things like that, 1099 NEC would not be required because instead that merchant processor is going to issue them a 1099K. So again, in general, if you make payments to a vendor, contractor, things like that for $600 or more in cumulative total throughout the year, it's going to trigger that 1099 NEC requirement unless it meets some of those exceptions. And then you're going to use a 1099 NEC for contractors and vendors and a 1099 miscellaneous for rent. Again, within the show notes, we have a Form W-9 that you can download. That's going to be what you're going to send these vendors and contractors. A Form W-8 BEN for individuals, a Form W-8 BENE if it's a foreign entity that you're paying. And I have in the show notes also links to a 1099 NEC, a 1099 MISC miscellaneous, so you kind of know what those forms look like. Again, I wanted to get this episode out now because the 1099 filing requirement is going to be coming up before you know it. January is going to get here, so I'd recommend doing some legwork now. If there's W-9s that you didn't collect, do that legwork now so that you can be on top of it, and hopefully this all makes sense. If you're in January and you're starting to hear this 1099 thing, just get on top of it early. Get the W-9s done. Use a software if you want to. Again, we use Track 1099, track1099.com to process all of our 1099s. It makes it easier. They do the electronic filing. They send emails out, everything else for a small fee for each 1099. But get on top of this early in January and do the legwork now before the year's end to grab all the information that you need. So hopefully this was helpful. Again, just want to kind of give you an idea of what 1099s were. If you're new to business, you might not know some of the stuff. If you've been in business a while, hopefully this brought some information, kind of cleared some cloudiness maybe around 1099s that you have. I want to thank you for listening to another episode, and I will see you next week.
This has been another episode of the Small Business Tax Savings Podcast. If you enjoy our weekly episodes, please leave a review and share with other business owners. You can find previous episodes and more information at www.taxsavingspodcast.com. Thanks for listening and have a great day.